Hello, hello, hello. I saw you dancing there.
You saw me shoulder shimmying? Yeah.
Your favorite, your favorite song. Welcome to the State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. That's Robert Hilliard. I'm Whitnie Wiley, and we are here with you every Thursday, except for those Thursdays we're not here. And, and we're here by satellite or remote or encore. We're here every Thursday, 12 o'clock noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, and whatever time that translates to wherever you are. And we're talking leadership. And today we're going to be talking. There are a number of different ways you can take this, but the impetus for our conversation is a remote work policy for Gravity Payments. And Gravity's CEO, Dan Price, is someone, if you are on LinkedIn, and that's one of the places that you are watching this live, we're on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. But if you're on LinkedIn, you probably see a lot of posts from Dan talking about how to do leadership well. And I want to say that I don't think I've seen him post anything that I haven't been in agreement with. So if I was ever to go work for somebody again, if I ever wanted to go work in a company full time, I would look to see what was happening in his organization that was a match for what I do. I believe that we share a very similar leadership philosophy. And what I was really interested in after reading the article, where the link to that article is in the post for this this episode, there's a link to another company, and I'm going to talk about that as well, and their remote work policy. So we're talking remote work policies, and we are but not talking specifically about the policy. That's the impetus for the conversation. We're going to be talking about empowering your employees, trusting your employees. This is something that Robert and I have talked about, I'm sure, more than once here. Empowering, trusting, and it boils down to this and the policy that they have for remote work. If you get your work done, that's all that matters. And that's something that I've been saying for, I don't know, probably as long as I've done work that didn't require me to actually be somewhere to do the work, right? So I waited tables at some point in my life. A little difficult to wait tables from home. Right?
Yeah.
A little difficult.
A little bit.
A little difficult not to work a shift in a restaurant where there's lunch and dinner going on, right? So I get it. There are some jobs that inherently that do not lend itself to my philosophy about work, which is if you get the work done, that is all that should matter. And I'm happy to see not only Dan Price, but other companies starting to adopt this approach as well. And Dan's company has, I think the last time I looked, it was around 120 or so employees, so relatively small. But I'm going to talk about another company that has over 40,000 employees in the United States. And so if it can work for a company that large and a company that small, I'm sure that approach can work for you for the jobs, the job duties, right, that lend itself to that kind of work. Obviously, if you've got manual labor or something that someone needs to be somewhere in particular, you have to have a different conversation. Doesn't mean that the mindset around that has to change, but obviously the policy around the work would change. So, Robert.
Huh. Wow. This always reminds me of the best manager I ever worked with, and she. I remember when she took over the department that I was working in, and she brought me into the office and she said, "I don't care how long your lunch is, as long as you get your work done." And then she said, "And don't embarrass me." So that was the caveat. But I think that was the first time I ever had someone said to me, I mean, it wasn't verbatim, but "I trust you to get your work done."
Right.
Get your work done. And I think that when we talk about this, we've talked about this a while ago. A lot of the reluctance, I think, is the industrial mindset that a lot of managers have. That modern, I shouldn't say modern, but management as we know it came to be during the Industrial Revolution. And a lot of folks still have that same, and you hear me say this all the time. It's almost like a broken record. If people know what records are.
Talk about industrial mindset.
It's a broken download. It's a glitchy download. But people still have this industrial mindset where they have to be the overseers of the factory. And if they can't be there, then they can't trust. If people aren't there, you can't trust them to do their work. And I think that is an archaic mindset. We both have been in group projects. This is one of the things that I know most grad students cannot stand, because there's always, not always, I shouldn't say that, but there's usually a social loafer or a free rider in that group. But I have to tell you, I've experienced that. It's usually one person that is not doing the work. It is not the majority of people that aren't doing the work. And I think that a lot of times managers or organizations, or however you want to put it, look at that small percentage in certain organizations and base their decision on that small percentage because they want to use it as a deterrent. And I think that it works in some cases, but I think that they're missing the mark if they employ these kind of policies, because it sends the message that they don't trust their employees to do their job.
Right. Is it the challenging piece of that is that it's, and in your example, you talk about the one person, right? Or the small handful of people in a larger organization. And if there were expectations laid out and then accountability that was a part of the process, you could take care of the one or the few. But we tend to have a conflict averse approach to relationships, work, education, right? We are not comfortable with conflict because we imagine that the conflict will be painful, to put it kindly, right? It's going to be painful. You work it into your head. So therefore, we're just going to avoid it. And the way we're going to deal with it then is to apply a policy to everyone where everyone doesn't need that policy. And what that does is creates resentment. It creates a feeling of, well, you don't trust me. You're not empowering me. You're not encouraging me to step up and be better or bring my best self, because you're treating me like the person that is the reason for you having this policy.
Right.
You're treating me in a way that doesn't apply to me.
Right. And, assuming that, and so what they're doing is they're putting very strict guardrails in place to make sure that if you did have that temptation, you can't, it's a deterrent. And for those folks that wouldn't do it or wouldn't even consider it, it doesn't matter to them because
Right.
so it's this kind of, I don't want to say all or nothing, but it's a very, to me, it just seems like a strange way to operate. But although a lot of people operate this way, I don't operate like that, which sometimes gets me in trouble. People tell me they're going to do something, I take them at their word.
Right.
And sometimes they don't do what they're going to say. And that happens. But you have to have the conversation. You have to be able to, have conflict that is productive and have some rules in place around conflict that allows you to have those discussions in a way that can bring a positive outcome. Not all conflict leads to bad outcomes.
Right. That's absolutely true. So Gravity's remote work policy were those 10 words, right? I read off 10 words. But before they got there, they had done some research. And
did you read it? I'm not sure that you did.
Oh, did I not? No, I thought I read it.
I don't know.
The policy is if you get your work done, that's all that matters.
I think did he say, what do I care after that or something like that?
So there was some other, I guess he had a tweet or something, and he says, well, do whatever you want as CEO, what do I care? And then there's the policy of if you get your work done, that's all that matters. And of course, there is pushback. If you read through the comments of anything he posts, there are those people who are stuck in the mindset that if you give employees freedom, they're going to abuse the freedom. And the interesting thing is the research has shown differently, right? It is not that they are taking advantage of it. There are companies who have leave policies where they're like, take whatever leave you need. People tend not to use their leave when they have it in buckets. They tend not to use their leave when they are given unlimited leave. So it is not that because you give someone freedom that they're going to run roughshod over you, right? People who are cognizant of, aware of, and have a work ethic are not taking advantage of the situations that they find themselves in, the privileges that they are afforded. And so it's a fear and a lack mentality that has people thinking that they'll be taken advantage of.
Right. Yeah, I agree. But I really want to frame this in a way that doesn't seem disparaging to anybody, because that's not the purpose of this. But I think that some leaders have this, let's face it, everybody can be fearful. I don't care if you are a CEO or the frontline staff, everybody can be fearful about something. And I think that when you lead from that, let me act as if I don't fear anything, that I am totally invulnerable. I think you're doing yourself and your organization a disservice. If you can be vulnerable about that and say, look, maybe this is not, our policy is not the best policy to have. Maybe we can do some, climate surveys or something like that, or, employment engagement surveys, and see what's going on in the organization and get some ideas and apply some policies that will improve morale. If you are having that issue, I think they would be better served to do that. But I don't know too many leaders that, I don't want to say I haven't heard of too many leaders that are willing to put their vulnerabilities and insecurities out there, because I think it goes against what they believe they should be doing as a leader.
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting you said that, because I teach an MBA class at a university, And we had an assignment, or the students had an assignment. I don't actually do the work. The
The work is
students had
different. You
an
don't do it.
I don't have to do the work anymore. But there was an assignment, a discussion assignment, where the question was about, would you rather have a company that is powerful or one that is fair? Right. And when the question is asked that way, there is sort of this inherent thought that it has to be one or the other, right? And I don't think any of the students responded with, it could be both, nor did anyone actually take the time to explain what powerful meant or what fair meant, right? There was a jumping to, I would rather a company be fair than powerful, or the CEO of a company be fair than powerful, when in fact, power doesn't have to be, and it's, this is our perception, or the way we have been taught to think about power, is that power is about running, it's taking advantage of people, it's running roughshod over them, rather than power is simply influence, right?
I was going to say,
That you could see it differently, and you can be powerful because you are influential. You can be powerful because you are fair. You can be powerful because you are vulnerable. You can be powerful out of all sorts of things. Power is not necessarily about, crushing people under your thumb. And until we start thinking about it differently, we're going to continue to have this conversation about how it manifests itself, and how leaders can be more, ultimately, the article is about emotional intelligence, right? It is, in the end, it becomes about the ability to understand and manage emotions, your emotions, the emotions of your employees, to understand who you are and how you navigate the world, having self-awareness about yourself, having awareness about your interaction with those that you're managing. And until you can do that and have some empathy for what people you are leading are feeling and going through, none of this really changes. And so it is, as you said, a small number of CEOs and leaders across, corporate structures all around the world that are having this mindset. I see it's growing, but it's still a very small number. And until that changes, going back to conversations that we've had, a few months ago, the continuing dearth of the inability of companies to find talent, or what's being described as companies' inability to find talent, is going to continue, because they're still looking for something that employees, the workforce, has taken a step in a different direction about.
But you have to be able to, we always talk about this.
Read the room.
Well, scan the system, read the room, scan the system, look at the external environment. You're all part of a system, and organizations sometimes forget that they're part of a larger system. And I don't want to get too much into systems and things like that, but they forget that they're part of a larger system. And when you need to be paying attention to when the system is changing, and when you need to exert influence on the system, if you can, to move you in the direction that is going to be advantageous to you. A lot of times organizations, they get stuck in their ways, and they are still trying to fit, a square peg in a round hole, with something that no longer works for them. And a lot of those organizations have gone by the wayside. They're gone, or they've gotten gobbled up by other organizations, and really just cannibalized, or just, scuttled for their resources. So you need to pay attention to what's going on in the larger system, what's happening, who's a part of the system. Your potential employees are part of the system that you belong to, and things are, they are trending in a different direction than you are willing to go. Then you may have a problem, but people don't seem to think that. And when you were talking about power, coercive power is the power that many leaders use. That is the only power that they are aware of, but there's all kinds of different power, and people exert power all the time. There's expert power, and sometimes we don't even realize that person is exerting expert power on
Yeah.
us. When they know something that you don't know, and they go, "Hey, look, let me show you." You're like, "Yes." you know, you, who wouldn't want to learn how to shoot foul shots from Michael Jordan? Even if you don't play basketball, you'd be like, absolutely. He's exerting his expert power. And I think that when leaders understand that there's more than one type of power that they can use, they get a lot more out of their employees, and their employees will be happier. But I think what ends up happening is, this works for me, this works for the organization, let's continue to use it over and over and over again. And they're not paying attention to when things change. Look, we've seen this in almost every aspect of business. There was a point where off-color jokes and jokes that had some kind of sexual connotation were widely accepted in the business world. And when things changed, there still are those people who are living in the past and still doing those things, and they get caught because they
struggling with the change.
They haven't paid attention to what's happened. And so, it's a symptom of who we are as human beings, but we have to be aware of it.
No, that's absolutely right. Which, continuing the discussion about power and coercive power, one of Dan's tweets says, if you feel like you need to do surveillance on your employees, you've messed up in the hiring and training process. And we talked about that in our episode where we talked about training, right? Mentoring, coaching, and the employee development. It is extremely important that you look at the life cycle of your employees' time with you. It's a continuum, and it starts actually before hiring. It starts with your strategic vision for your employees and what they're doing in your organization, the roles that you have defined, right? The job descriptions that you have for your employees. And then looking at the characteristics of who would best fill those, not just looking at skill, right? If all you're doing is hiring for skill, then you probably do have some problems when it comes to trusting your employees, right? If you are hiring the kinds of people that need to be told what to do, how to do it, then you would have this as a problem. Whereas if you approached it in a more holistic manner, all right, from beginning to end, how you want this to roll out, the vision that you have, then your approach to hiring and training and developing your employees would, one, you would have the kinds of employees where that would make sense. And then it would eliminate, and I don't want to go down this path too much because we've talked about this as well, but eliminate your need to be an overseer, right? But for some, that means that, who am I? What is my job? If I am not an overseer, if I am not doing my job like that, then what am I? What value am I bringing? Which is a whole other issue.
Right. What I think is so interesting about this topic is that, and this is, you talk about systems, right? So we started in one place and we've touched on like 4, 5, or 6 different things so far, because your policy, the policy that you put in place, this is where we started, really is a symptom of where you are as an organization, what you do as leaders, the kind of people you hire, the kind of people you want to attract. It's really important. I worked in recruiting, and I remember I worked for a boss that the one of the main questions he would ask is, "What's taking so long?" It wasn't, why aren't we attracting people? Because it didn't matter the quality of people we were attracting. It was fill the slot so the CEO doesn't ask me, why it's not filled. That was the main concern. And I always had a problem with that, because we should be really looking at, like you're saying, what kind of candidate is going to fit the organization, is going to fit our culture, is going to work well with people. It can't be just the skill. It has to be other things. You have to include attitude and some other things in there, because you can have the most knowledgeable, skilled person that you've ever seen in a position, but if they're making the department or the group miserable, you're going to have an additional problem that will be greater than your lack of skill.
Yes. Yes.
It's just it's one of those things. Wouldn't you rather take your time and get the candidate that's going to have the skill, or have enough of the skill so that it can be trained in gaining more, but have an attitude where other people would want to work with them, rather than having someone who has fantastic skills but is a horror to work with? But I know a lot of leaders that would say, "Give me the horror," because they have the skill. I'll deal with all the outcome. And then they wonder why they're having a problem. And then when you ask them about that, they're like, "Well, this isn't my fault." It absolutely is.
But they miss the other piece of that is, if you're having performance issues, attitude issues, discipline issues, every moment that you spend as a manager, a leader, dealing with those things is a moment that you're not being productive in your work.
Yeah.
Right. Most managers are working managers. They don't just sit around with a whip or a checklist,
Clipboard,
walking around. Yes, a clipboard, walking around checking things off. Right.
That's technology.
That's not how most of them operate. They actually have work as well. And so every moment that you spend working on those discipline issues is a moment you're not working, and it's a moment you're not developing others.
Right.
Right. And maybe that's part of the issue. I don't know how to develop. So I'd rather spend my time over here on discipline, because that's just easier. There's a prescribed maybe path for doing that, whereas there isn't in the other direction.
Yeah.
But I wanted to talk a little bit about the other company. It's Siemens. And they have 40,000 US employees, 380,000 employees around the globe. And late last year, they put together or released their remote work policy. And so there's another article, I will share the link to that says that every remote work policy should start with the following 2 sentences. And this is basically the gravity policy, a few more words, but it's the same essence. Focus on outcomes rather than time spent in the office. Trust and empower your employees. All right, these 2 sentences. If you start there, and that's all it's saying, let's start there. Right? And let's see what happens. Focus on outcomes rather than time spent. And it's interesting because when you focus on outcomes, not hours, notwithstanding, and I've said this before, this caveat, this disclaimer, it in California, I don't know the labor laws all across the country. Um, but work is set up in a way, the legislative construct is set up in a way that it is focused on hours, right? And not the work itself. And in fact, when you try to focus on the work itself, you can run afoul of the law. We're
Right.
not talking the law. Yes, I am a lawyer, but we're not having this conversation about law. I just wanted to make it clear. I understand that there is some constraint about hours and people getting paid for a particular number of hours. We're not talking about that.
And
Yes,
those
that
are
is
there.
an issue,
Yeah.
but we're not talking about that.
Well, but those are there for the mutual benefit of the organization and the employees that work for them as well. So, that's something to point out as well.
No, but I'm just saying, so if I can get 40 hours of work done, and first of all, I don't know anyone who works 40 hours per week, right? Doing intellectual work, certainly. Even those who are doing billable hours, in order to bill like 40 hours, you've got to do way more than that, right? So the 40 hours of actual work is a lot of work. And I will say that when I wasn't an hourly employee, but I, had a full-time job
Mhm.
for someone. I worked in spurts. That's just the way it was. A lot of my job I saw as relationship building. So you talked about lunches earlier. I had a lot of long lunches, had a lot of coffees, morning coffees, afternoon coffees, opportunities to interact, build relationship with, and try to work and find consensus with people that I spent and at times that were not me sitting at my desk where someone would walk by and see me looking productive, right? I had the ability, I had an office, had a door. I worked with my feet up on my desk, leaned back in a chair on the telephone. That was the nature of what I did. If you were to ask me about, whether or not I spent 40 hours of a week working, right? When I think of all of that was work, true. But when I think of someone thinking of me being productive, they're probably only thinking about when I was sitting and writing something, right?
Yeah.
When there was a product at the end of it. But all of that is part of what it takes to get your job done. And until people understand that, and you go through a job description, there are all kinds of things that make up the work.
Sure.
That may not look to anyone walking by like you're being productive. Thinking, being creative is productive. And I will say this, I think I learned that lesson when I met you in grad school.
What
Right?
did I
We
do?
took this creative thinking course, which at the time I was like, why am I taking? Why is this part of the curriculum? And I would say it probably was one of the most eye-opening courses that I have ever taken. And about the importance of and our need to think creatively and to have time to do so. So even if your job is something else, spending a little time being creative and thinking through problems so that you can come up with a solution is a productive use of your time. And so to think that if I'm not, assembling widgets, I'm not working is one, unfair. And I think it goes back to your point about, the way we look at work from an industrial perspective rather than where we are, which is a knowledge economy, right? And understanding that aspect of the work that gets done. And it can be just as taxing, as physical.
Thank you for bringing up that class. That was probably the best class I've ever taken in my life, period. It was a great class, and I probably should reach out to that professor. But you're right. I remember one time I came up with an idea in an organization I worked with that my manager at the time thought was the most incredible thing that he had seen. And he was, how did you come up with it? And I said, I did research. I said, when you see me reading at my desk, I am not, I told him, I said, what do you think I do when you see me reading? I am looking for ideas. I am researching things. I am grabbing ideas from other people. I'm seeing if I can combine them with other ideas. I'm doing that work so that I can present these ideas to you as a finished product. And I think that one of the things that threw him off, and I had to tell him, I said, this is the work that I typically would do on the weekend for you all. And I said, I no longer do that. And it was part of a larger conversation because it's not appreciated. What was appreciated was, me doing all these things, but you never got accolades for all the hundreds of hours that I spent on the weekends putting work together, doing research, running to Staples, spending my own money to come back and put together binders for presentations that I would then bring to the executive leadership on his behalf to get him the programs that he wanted. And so I said, and that became part of a greater conversation. I said, I no longer do this stuff on the weekend. This is, you're watching me do the work that I would do on the weekend when I wasn't getting paid for you. Now you witness it. Now you know how I put the stuff together. And that was really important. And that's a larger conversation. We're talking about trusting employees. A few years prior to that, I was in charge of putting together the orientation for this organization. I did a lot of onboarding and things like that. And it was offsite. And I would go and prepare. It was on a Monday, and I would go and prepare on a Friday. And it took me about 40 minutes to get to this location and 40 minutes back. And in the preparation, I was out of the office for about 3 hours total. And this person would complain, my boss would complain, why are you away so these 3 hours that I can't account for? And I would explain to him. So one day I said, come with me. So he took some time out, went to travel, saw that the train took forever to get there, got there, went into the room where I was supposed to set up for this orientation. All of my equipment was someplace else. No one could find it. There had been food left in the room for 3 days. I had to go and find some, so he could finally see. And a lot of times, but the instinct was not to trust.
Yeah.
And that, I think that's the issue. It's like, well, I said, okay, well, just come with me. Because that wasn't something that I offered as a last resort. I offered it several times, and finally he wouldn't do it. And finally, after he complained like the third time, I said, well, I'm going to actually request that you come with me. And I won't go until you come with me because you need to see what's happening. And he came and he got to see the total chaos. And basically he was so frustrated that he was like, okay. I'm gonna go back. I can't take it anymore. I said, but this is what I go through every time I have to set up for this. And I think that it's a, the general, I don't know if it's a people thing or a management thing, but the general gist is don't trust what you can't see.
Right. But the interesting thing is that for people who have jobs where there is a product at the end, whether, in my case, whether it was legislation or a white paper, a presentation, whatever it is, it's as if the thing that is the end result got done by fairies.
I was going to say,
right? As if the time that it takes for that to be produced means nothing. And so you have to go, if you're getting the results that you want, then trust that the time was put in that was needed to get the results that you want. Now, if what you're getting at the end is not of a quality, not of a quantity that you want, that's a whole other thing. That there's an accountability piece in that. But if you are getting at the end the outcome that you are desiring, the one that was expected and delivered, then trusting that the time was put in to get you what you want. And that should be all that matters.
And here's the other thing. Eventually the truth will come out. If someone is not doing what they're supposed to do, eventually it'll come out. I think we have this kind of shame when we find things out that perhaps other folks say that we should have known about. But the bottom line is you found out about it. And I think that's the issue. And I think that treating everybody like they cannot be trusted, it sends the wrong impression. And
Right.
I like to equate this thing to relationships. I wonder what would happen if they treated their significant other that way. So people are people. This is a human issue. If you treated your significant other that way, you probably don't have a very good relationship.
Right.
Or they're not happy. I'm not a relationship coach, but I would. But I have been rumored to have been in them.
Well, it boils down to this, I'm not looking to blame leadership or management, but to challenge you to approach this differently. Mm-hmm. And so again, you can spend your time on discipline problems, or you can spend your time empowering people and getting the results that you want in a way that I think you would find to be less stressful, more enjoyable for you and your employees, and ultimately increases productivity and improves your bottom line and the culture in your organization. So you can continue to do it the old way, or you can try trusting your employees, right? Trust that you have empowered them, and with that you will get the results that you're looking for. And when you do get that outcome, to acknowledge it and reward it. If you acknowledge it and reward it.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I do want to make a point though, because as you were talking, something popped up in my head. That boss was extremely worried about the time that I was, because of the pressure that they were feeling from their boss. And these are the things people tend to forget, that these things have a cascading type of effect. So the boss it's snowball effect, right? The boss puts pressure on this manager puts pressure on me. I go down there and I go, we'll come and look. And that's the only way that he could have any kind of information to give to his boss. And I think that that's important. You need to understand that. But I don't think that a lot of people care. It's like, get the work done. That's it.
Right. And again, I think it comes down to this. It's sort of it's an upfront energy rather than at the end energy, right? the approach that Siemens, Gravity, and others have taken as it relates to remote work can apply across all kinds of issues. It's not just a remote work issue. It applies across the board. This is just one of the ways that it manifests itself.
Yeah, I totally agree.
The focus is on the front end, which is I'm going to provide you the tools, the resources, the strategies, we'll work together, the strategies to help you, the training, the knowledge, all of that. I'm going to give you that upfront and continuously, which requires energy, right? So that I can minimize the energy that has to be expended on the back end, which is more of a punitive, disciplinary approach.
Yeah.
So you can put it on the front end or you could put it on the back end. You get to decide. My proposition to you is that if you do it on the front end, it's less stressful overall. And it creates a work environment that makes the energy you would spend on the back end less needed. Not going to say it's going to eliminate all of your performance issues, but if you're having performance issues, if you're having trust issues, you need to look at your hiring practices. And we can talk about that in another episode. But you can, in fact, spend the energy on the front end and create. It really boils down to creating the environment that allows you to get the results that you want. And so if you take the time to think about what that is and put the energy into creating that environment, you are more likely to get what you want than if you just say, I'm going to do it this way because this is the way it's always been done. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think that at some point, in addition to that, Whitney, we can talk about how, because I coached a lot of executives that would get into trouble doing what you suggest. They would come into an organization and they would they would get do what you need to do to run your department. And then as soon as they would do something that was a little bit counterculture or off, they would get into trouble. So I think that it's being able to have those conversations like you had mentioned earlier, but it also goes into being able to look at the things that you can change and the things that may cause you trouble if you try to change them. And I think that especially when, I get really concerned when my friends tell me they got hired for a job and their boss is telling them that they can run their department any way that they see fit. I'm like, that's probably not what they mean. You better go back and ask some questions so that you're not getting yourself in any kind of trouble. And I think that's really important to know what you can change and to do it in a way that's going to have people being more productive, have better morale in your department, but it's not going to get you in any kind of cultural, trouble. I think that's really important as well.
No, a lot of that is communication, right?
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
And having some expectations, laying them out and working through them. This is not to say that you just walk in and change things or that is going to work this out perfectly overnight. But that doesn't mean that you don't make efforts to move in a different direction. So
absolutely.
With that, we want to thank you for joining us for this episode of The State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. If you have a topic that you would like for us to cover, please drop either of us a line, or if there's something we can do to help you in your leadership development, you need executive coaching or organizational assistance, please reach out to us as well. And with that, again, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific, and have a great rest of your day. Take
Bye.
care.
Bye now.